The sun set over the barren landscape, casting long shadows across the desolate wasteland. Ilara, a young alien mother, trudged through the dusty terrain, her body weary from the long days of searching for food. The heat of the day had long since faded, but her energy was nearly gone. She hadn't eaten in 3 days, and her child Kova was growing weaker by the hour. The small amount of water she had left was nearly gone too. But there was nothing to do but keep moving. Her homeland had once been lush and fertile, but now it was a shadow of what it had been. The war between the Empire and the Resistance had turned the planet into a wasteland. The invaders had stripped the land of its resources, and the native species, including Ilara's people, were left to suffer the consequences. The Empire's soldiers patrolled the remaining cities while the Resistance struggled to make any real progress against the overwhelming force of their enemies. Ilara's heart ached as she thought about Kova. The child had not even reached his 5th year, but already he had witnessed horrors no one should ever experience. His bright eyes were dull from hunger, and his small frame was frail. He had no idea what was going on, only that his mother had promised to keep him safe. But how could she protect him when she couldn't even provide food for him? Ilara wiped the sweat from her brow and took a deep breath, trying to steady her shaking hands. She had been a scout for her people, skilled at navigating the harsh terrain of their world, but today she felt like a mere shell of herself. Every step felt heavier than the last. She had scoured the ruins of the old city for days, finding nothing but empty buildings and broken machinery. The humans who had settled on her planet after the war were no better off, scraping by in their own outposts, just as desperate as the aliens they once fought against. But she had heard rumors of a small human resistance group, hidden in the hills on the outskirts of the city. They were not like the Empire's soldiers, ruthless and cold. They were different. They fought for survival just as her people did. Maybe they could help. Maybe they could give her the one thing she needed: food. The thought gave her a surge of hope, but it was quickly replaced by doubt. She had no guarantee that they would help an alien, let alone a mother in need. But what other choice did she have? She couldn't keep wandering through the wasteland hoping to find scraps. She glanced down at Kova, who had stumbled behind her, his feet dragging in the dirt. His face was pale and his lips cracked from thirst. Ilara's heart broke seeing him like this. She bent down, lifting him into her arms. "Just a little farther," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was convincing him or herself. As she continued to walk, the sky darkened, and the first stars began to twinkle overhead. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the scorching heat, but it did little to ease the ache in her stomach. She could feel her body weakening with every step. She had been pushing herself too hard, too long, but she had to keep going. She had to find help. After what felt like an eternity, Ilara finally saw a flicker of light in the distance. A campfire. Relief washed over her and she hurried toward it, her footsteps growing faster, almost frantic. She couldn't let herself think too much about what might happen. The firelight could be a sign of hope, or it could be a trap set by the Empire. But she had no choice. She had to take the risk. As she drew closer, she saw a group of humans sitting around the fire. They looked tired, just as she felt, but there was a sense of camaraderie between them. They wore worn-out clothing and carried makeshift weapons, signs of a group that had been fighting for a long time. They were part of the human resistance, the ones who had refused to bow down to the Empire's rule. Ilara hesitated at the edge of the camp, unsure how to approach them. She had heard that the humans were distrustful of her kind, and given the current state of affairs, it wasn't surprising. But the child in her arms, weak and fragile, was all the motivation she needed. She stepped forward, hoping that they would see her as a mother in need rather than just another alien. One of the men, a tall human with short dark hair, turned toward her. His expression was cautious, but not hostile. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. Ilara swallowed hard, trying to gather her strength. "I am Ilara. I'm from the village to the north," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I have a child. We've been starving for days." The man's eyes softened when he saw Kova. but he remained guarded. "You don't look like you're from the Empire," he said, his tone less suspicious now. "But that doesn't mean you're one of us. Why should we trust you?" Ilara's heart sank. She could understand his hesitation. Trust was a rare commodity in this war, and even the smallest mistake could lead to death. "Please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I'm not asking for much, just food for my child. He hasn't eaten in days." The man studied her for a long moment, then glanced around at the others sitting by the fire. They were all looking at her now, their faces unreadable. The air was thick with tension. Ilara held her breath, unsure if she would be sent away or given the chance she so desperately needed. Finally, the man nodded. "We'll help you," he said, his voice firm. "But you'll have to prove yourself. We don't give food away, for nothing." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. This was her chance. She had no idea what kind of task they would set for her, but she was willing to do anything to save her son. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice steady now, filled with determination. The man gestured for her to sit. "Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." Ilara sat down beside the fire, her eyes never leaving her child. She was exhausted, but a small spark of hope flickered in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them after all. The fire crackled softly as Ilara sat by its warmth, her body still aching from the long trek. Her eyes never left Kova, who had curled up in her lap, his small form trembling slightly in his exhaustion. She stroked his hair gently, trying to soothe him. But her mind raced with thoughts of what the humans might ask in return for food. The man's words echoed in her ears. "We'll help you, but you'll have to prove yourself." What did that mean? What kind of task could she possibly complete in her weakened state? She glanced around the camp, her eyes meeting the wary gazes of the humans. They were an odd group, each of them hardened by the struggle for survival. She could see it in their eyes, the weariness, the bitterness, but also the flicker of something else. Hope. Her thoughts were interrupted when a figure approached her from the shadows, tall and broad-shouldered. It was the man from earlier, the one who had spoken to her. He walked with a steady gait, his boots crunching on the ground as he moved toward her. His name, she recalled, was Jace. He stopped in front of her, his eyes scanning the fire for a moment before resting on her face. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze was intense, as if weighing something in her. "Ilara," he said, his voice rough, but not unkind. "You said you've been starving for days. How long has it been? Since you last ate?" She swallowed hard, her throat dry. 3 days, she replied, barely above a whisper. "We haven't had anything but water." Jace's gaze softened for a brief moment, but he quickly masked it with a hint of skepticism. "And you say you're not with the Empire?" he asked, leaning slightly forward. Ilara nodded. "I would never align myself with them. My people are not like them. We're not invaders." The silence that followed felt heavy. Jace crossed his arms, studying her closely. "I don't doubt that. But my people have had their fair share of tricks played on them by aliens who look like you. How do I know you're not here to spy on us?" Ilara's heart sank. She could feel the weight of his suspicion, and she knew she had to say something to ease his doubts. "I've been fighting for my people's survival too," she said quietly, her voice trembling but strong. "I don't have time to spy. I only want to keep my son alive." Jay studied her for a long moment before turning to look at the others around the fire. A few of them had been listening closely to their conversation, their faces a mixture of curiosity and doubt. After a few moments, Jace nodded and knelt down beside her. "We're not heartless," he said. "We know what it's like to lose everything, but you need to understand trust is a hard thing to come by. It has to be earned." Ilara's eyes dropped to the ground. "I understand," she murmured. She hadn't expected anything to be handed to her easily. She was an outsider here, a mother desperate for help, but her people's struggle had been the same for so long. It was a fight for survival, and that was something Jace and his group would understand. Jace looked at her again, his expression now a little softer. Listen, we'll give you food, but there's one thing I need to know. Are you ready to fight? We're not a charity. We don't just give food to anyone who asks. If you want to survive here, you need to help us. Otherwise, we're all just waiting to die. The words hit her like a hammer. The idea of fighting, of using what little strength she had left to fight for something bigger than herself, it was terrifying, yet it felt right. She couldn't just take from them. She couldn't just expect their charity. Alara thought of Kova, of the future she wanted for him, a future where they weren't constantly running, constantly hiding, a future where they could stand strong, where they could fight back. The Empire had taken so much from them already. If she could help stop them, then she would, for her son and for everyone who had been crushed under the Empire's rule. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady now. I'll fight. Jace nodded, satisfied with her answer. Good. We can use someone like you, but we have to make sure you're capable. Tomorrow morning we'll head out. We've got a mission. You'll join us. Alara's heart raced. She had no idea what she had just agreed to, but it didn't matter. She had already made her decision. The thought of getting involved in a fight against the Empire terrified her, but it also gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in days. She would do whatever it took to protect Kova. As if reading her thoughts, Jace spoke again. You don't have to worry about your son right now. He'll be safe here. The others will look after him. Alara nodded, relief flooding through her. For the first time in days, she felt a small weight lift off her shoulders. She could finally focus on something other than survival. Kova would be safe, and she would be able to do something meaningful. She could fight for a future where her son didn't have to grow up in fear. We'll start early tomorrow, Jace continued, his voice firm. Get some rest. You'll need it. Alara glanced at Kova, whose tiny form was now asleep in her arms. She gently shifted him onto her lap, adjusting him so he was more comfortable. The warmth from the fire flickered across his face, casting soft shadows on his features. She sighed, stroking his hair again as she settled back against a rock. The night felt quiet, peaceful even for the first time in so long. The constant worry, the fear, the hunger, they all seemed to melt away in this small moment of respite. She closed her eyes, taking in the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the crackling of the fire. She was tired, so incredibly tired, but she felt a small spark of hope deep inside her chest. She could do this. She had to. She had to fight for her son. The morning came faster than Alara had anticipated. She awoke with the first light of dawn, her body stiff from the cold night and the hard ground. She glanced down at Kova, still asleep in her arms, his chest rising and falling gently with each breath. The child was peaceful for now, unaware of the dangers that lurked just beyond their camp. The fire from the night before had burned down to embers, and the others in the camp were already stirring. Jace was talking quietly to two of his companions, both humans who were preparing their weapons. The others seemed to be packing supplies, readying themselves for whatever mission Jace had planned. Alara stood, stretching her aching limbs, and carefully laid Kova down on a blanket. She made sure he was tucked in securely, then walked over to Jace, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had no idea what she was about to face, but she had committed herself. She had to trust that this was the right decision. She had no choice but to believe in the future she was fighting for. You ready? Jace asked, his voice low but steady as he met her eyes. Alara nodded. I'm ready. Jace gave her a small, approving nod before turning to the rest of the group. All right, listen up, he called, his voice carrying through the camp. We've got a job to do. We need to move fast and stay quiet. The last thing we need is to attract attention. The group gathered around him, each person nodding and understanding. Alara couldn't help but notice the way they moved with purpose, their expressions serious. They were experienced, battle-hardened, and they didn't seem to have any illusions about what they were up against. These were people who had learned to survive at all costs, and Alara had to admit she felt a little out of place among them. But she had made her choice. She was here now, and there was no turning back. Jace turned to her once more. "We'll be moving out in a few minutes. Stay close to me. Don't wander off." Ilara didn't need to be told twice. She was already on high alert, her senses sharpened by the weight of the situation. This wasn't just another scavenging mission. This was something more dangerous, something far riskier. The Empire's soldiers could be anywhere. As the group moved out, Ilara found herself walking alongside Jace, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The path ahead was narrow, winding through dense trees and uneven ground. The air was thick with the smell of earth and the faint scent of smoke from the nearby outpost. For a long while, the journey was quiet. The only sounds were the soft rustling of the leaves and the occasional crunch of gravel underfoot. Ilara kept her breathing steady, focusing on the task ahead. She had to stay focused. She had to prove herself to Jace and the others. Jace leaned closer to Ilara. "Stay down. We can't afford to make a sound." Ilara's body stiffened as the group crouched low to the ground, using the trees for cover. The soldiers were getting closer, their boots crunching on the dry leaves, their voices a low murmur in the distance. Ilara held her breath, her hands shaking as she tried to remain as still as possible. She knew that if they were caught, it would mean certain death. The Empire showed no mercy to those who opposed them. They would kill without hesitation. Ilara had seen it before. It had happened to her village, to her family. The memory of those days, of the flames and the screams, still haunted her. The wine. Soldiers paused just a few feet away and Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the tension in the air like a live wire, ready to snap at any moment. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying that they wouldn't be noticed. Suddenly, one of the soldiers turned and looked directly in their direction. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. She could hear the soldier's footsteps growing louder as he began to walk closer. Jace's hand shot out, gripping Ilara's arm, pulling her down even lower. He didn't say a word, but his gaze met hers with a silent command. "Stay down. Stay quiet." The soldier was nearly upon them. Ilara held her breath, hoping against hope that he wouldn't see them. And then, at the last moment, the soldier's radio crackled to life. He stopped in his tracks, his attention diverted as he spoke into the device. His voice was low, but Ilara could hear the words clearly. "Command reports a disturbance to the north. We need to investigate." The soldier turned around, signaling to the others. "Move out. We're heading to the north side." Ilara exhaled slowly, her body trembling with relief. The soldiers began to march away, their attention no longer on the group. Ilara didn't dare move until they were completely out of sight. As the last of the soldiers disappeared into the trees, Jace let out a quiet sigh of relief. He stood up slowly and then turned to face the group. His eyes were sharp, but there was a hint of gratitude in his expression as he looked at Ilara. "That was close," he muttered. "Too close." Ilara's heart was still racing, but she managed a shaky nod. I don't know what I would have done if they'd found us." Jace gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You held it together. You did good." The words sent a small, warm feeling through Ilara. She had done good. She hadn't panicked. She had kept calm under pressure. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The group continued on their path, moving cautiously through the woods. Ilara remained close to Jace, her thoughts focused on what lay ahead. The Empire was a constant threat, but now, more than ever, Ilara felt a sense of purpose. They were fighting for something worth fighting for. The day had begun to fade, casting long shadows across the dense forest as the group of rebels pressed on through the underbrush. The narrow path they had been following was rugged, with thorns and twisted roots that seemed to reach up to snag their feet. Ilara was exhausted, but her mind was sharp. The events of the morning still lingered in her thoughts, the soldiers, the near discovery. Despite the danger, she couldn't shake the feeling of triumph. They had escaped and she had stayed calm under pressure. It was something she hadn't been sure she could do, but now she knew she could. Jace walked in front, his posture alert, scanning the path ahead. He was a natural leader. No one doubted his authority. Ilara could see the respect in the eyes of the others as they followed his every move, listening intently to his commands. There was something about him that made it easy to follow. He didn't ask for respect, but he earned it with every decision, every action. The rest of the group was moving quietly, their faces set with determination. Ilara noticed how the others exchanged glances, the silent communication between them. They were all soldiers in one way or another, hardened by years of conflict. But there was something else in the air today, something unspoken. The bond between them, though forged through hardship, seemed to grow stronger with every step. She glanced down at Kova, who was nestled in her arms, his small body still limp with exhaustion. He hadn't spoken since the morning, and Ilara's heart ached every time she looked at him. She could see the pain in his eyes when he was awake, but he rarely had the energy to cry anymore. "Ilara," Jace said suddenly, his voice low and purposeful. She looked up, startled, as he turned to face her. "How's he doing?" She swallowed, glancing at her son. "He's tired. He hasn't eaten much in days. I don't know how much longer he can go like this." Jace's eyes softened, though his expression remained serious. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind before he spoke again. "We'll get him something to eat soon. We've got a small cache of supplies a little farther ahead. But if things go south, we may have to fight our way out." Ilara nodded. She could see the flicker of concern in Jace's eyes, even though he was trying to remain stoic. The tension between survival and hope was something that all of them carried, but the weight of it felt even heavier on her shoulders as a mother. She couldn't help but wonder if Kova would ever be able to experience a normal childhood. One, free from the constant threat of violence and hunger. Would he ever know peace? The group continued to move forward, and after what felt like an eternity of silence, they finally reached their destination. A small, abandoned building, hidden deep within the forest. It was far from the safety of the outpost, but it was a place where they could rest, regroup, and refuel before the next phase of their journey. Jace led them inside, pushing open the creaky door with a sharp, deliberate motion. The space was dim, with old furniture scattered around and dust covering the floors. It looked as though it hadn't been used in years, but it would provide them with the cover they needed for now. "Ilara," Jace said once they were all inside, "find a place to settle in. We'll get the food ready soon." She nodded, still, cradling Kova in her arms. The weight of the day had begun to wear on her, and she could feel her body aching more with every passing moment. She carefully laid her son down on one of the dusty mattresses in the corner and sat beside him, her eyes never leaving his fragile form. The others went about their tasks, unpacking supplies and setting up makeshift barricades to secure the building. Jace spoke quietly with one of the other rebels, a woman with short-cropped hair named Mara. The conversation was inaudible, but Ilara could tell that they were discussing their next move. The Empire's forces were always just one step behind them, and they couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. Ilara let out a long breath, her mind racing with thoughts of her people, her home, and the life she had lost. The thought of Kova never experiencing the world she had once known, the green fields, the rivers, the sounds of her people's laughter, filled her with an ache that was almost too much to bear. Everything had been taken from them. The Empire had come in and ravaged their world, destroying everything they had built. And now they were all just fighting to survive, clinging to a fragile hope that things could be different. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Jace sitting down beside her until he spoke. "Ilara," he said gently, his voice soft but firm. "I know you're scared. I know it's hard, but you've got to stay focused. We're doing everything we can to make sure your son has a future. You're not alone in this. We're all fighting for the same thing." She turned to him, her eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and pain. She hadn't realized how much she had needed to hear those words. She had always been strong, always pushed through the hardest of times. But hearing Jace say that, hearing him promise that they were all in this together, it made something inside her shift. It gave her the strength to keep going. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I just want him to be safe." I want him to grow up in a world that's better than this." Jace nodded, his expression filled with understanding. "We all do, and we'll fight for that world. For you. For Kova." Ilara let out a slow breath, nodding in return. The weight of the world didn't feel so heavy anymore. Not with Jace beside her. Not with the others fighting by her side. She wasn't alone. The words of the resistance had meant something deeper now. They were a promise, a commitment to each other's survival. Together, they were stronger. As the group settled in for the night, Ilara's eyes lingered on Kova, watching. As he slept soundly for the first time in days, her heart swelled with a quiet hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild, fight for a better future. She didn't know how long it would take, or what the future held, but she knew this. She wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. The night passed slowly, but the quiet moments were filled with a sense of unity. As Ilara lay next to her son, exhaustion finally catching up with her, she closed her eyes, thinking of the words Jace had shared. There was still so much to fight for, and for the first time in a long while she believed they could win.